program is Dr. Andrew Doan. Dr. Andrew Doan is the author of Hooked on Games. He is a recognized expert in the field of technology and video game addiction. With a doctoral degree in neuroscience from Johns Hopkins University, and he brings with him over 10 years of experience researching learning, memory, and brain development. Please welcome Dr. Andrew Doan.
Thank you. Well, good morning. It's great to be here. So who in the audience think that technology and video gaming is healthy for the mind? Raise your hand. How about bad for the mind? Raise their hand. Okay, so I want to encourage you all to think about this as if you have one standpoint, try to see the other side. Because the truth lies in both. It's both bad and good, and it's how we use the technology and the gaming. And so, in essence, I want you to view digital media as like a drug that can physiologically cause change in your body and also rewire your brain. Standard disclaimer, I am an active duty officer in the U.S. Navy, so if you get irritated or if I offend you, please send me hate mail and not the Department of Defense. And my financial disclosure is that I'm a founder of Real Battle Ministries as well as the author of Hooked on Games. So this is a picture of me doing eye surgery. So I'm an intraocular surgeon by trade. However, I spent over 10 years studying neuroscience and how the brain encodes learning and memory and affect behavior. And I had 6 full-ride scholarships to med school, and I went to Johns Hopkins for my degree. But my closet skeleton that I'm going to share with you, that I'm a gaming addict. And so literally in med school, I got hooked on this thing so much that when I was in college, I was pretty athletic. I played rugby. I was a 3-sports letterman in high school. I was vice president of my freshman class in junior high. And eventually, I played 50 to 100 hours a week on gaming. And because I was this high-strung, manic physician, I could sleep 2 to 3 hours a night. And then eventually, after 10 years of 20,000 hours of gaming, I gained almost over 200 pounds. I had stretch marks. I had carpal tunnel because all I did was click the mouse on real-time strategy games and all these stupid, repetitive movements at the mouse and the keyboard, and addicted to email and texting, all that kind of stuff. And this is the evidence of the physiological ramifications. I almost was near divorce, spent $20,000 in trying to fix my marriage, and luckily we are now married and we're going to celebrate our 18th year of marriage, but this is 4 years later after I finally almost lost my medical career on this thing. So really, I'm here because it's far easier to build strong children than fix broken adults. And so, view gaming as a digital drug. This is all based on medical research. We know that games increase hand-eye coordination. It reduces anxiety and depression because when you get that text message, you get that euphoric rush in your head. It's someone that you love sends you a love message. We know that gaming acts against depression. We know it enhances memory skills. It's a great training tool. First-person shooters are used by the police department and military to train their troops. It's also effective in solving science problems, and also we're now using it in military personnel to cope with post-traumatic stress disorder. So they're raging in the game rather than raging on their wives and family when they come back from war. And then we also use it for pain management. So this is a wounded warrior who has a burn. Who has a burn here before? It's painful. But when you have a severe third-degree burn, you have to scrub the dead tissue off the wound. So this is the nurse scrubbing that dead tissue off. Narcotics don't work anymore because the brain develops tolerance. So now they hook this wounded warrior up to a virtual reality scenario. They're wearing glasses. They use a joystick, and they throw snowballs at snowmen and penguins. That reduces their pain so much as a sedative to the brain that now the bandages can be changed daily on this burn victim. It's a digital drug. That's why kids love it. It numbs their mind. And it basically provides a euphoric sedative. So with any kind of drug, overuse, there's problems. So cocaine, good or bad? How about bad? How about good? Well, I didn't know. I never used it. But truthfully, I use cocaine derivatives every day in my clinic as eye drops and in the eye. I could not do intraocular surgery if I didn't give you a narcotic. We have billions of people taking narcotics, but we don't run around as billions of people of addicted individuals in the world. So keep in mind, how about water? Good? How about bad? It's neither, actually, because if you drink too much water, you get hyponatremia and your brain swells and you die. So therefore, anything with a physiological effect can be bad if used too much. So that leads to video gaming, texting, social media, addiction, sleep deprivation, because it becomes that euphoric drive. Now the kids aren't sleeping. The problem is when you sleep, that's when your brain detoxifies and hardens the memory and the learning that you did during that day. So therefore, if they're not sleeping very well, they're not learning, they're not remembering, and they're also toxic kid syndrome. There's gamer rage, depression, anxiety, antisocial behavior, failure to achieve potential, and finally, the worst outcomes are family abuse and extreme family violent behaviors. And that was me. Every other word was a swear word to my wife. I have my book out there, and I go in more detail about that. But I wanted to emphasize that regardless of the addictive behavior or substance, it acts on the neurotransmitter system called dopamine. So this is a graphic of the presynaptic terminal making synaptosomes of dopamine, which belongs to a class of neurotransmitters called the catecholamines. So if you don't have enough of this, you feel depressed. If you have enough, you feel euphoric and great. So what happens is, in an addict, there's an emotional trigger, something that's hurt inside our hearts or deep inside our souls, and it causes for us to seek a craving, a ritual, and something to use to relieve that pain. See, for me, I had a very low self-esteem being an Asian American. I came from Vietnam, and my name was Phuong Duc Doan. And for the older members of the audience, you remember 16 Candles? Yes. Yeah, you remember Long Duc Dong? Well, I was the Phuong Duc Dong of the neighborhood. And my brother, he was the Phuong Ding Dong. So it's Phuong Ding Dong, Phuong Duc Dong, right? So I grew up not knowing how to cope with this thing, so I found online games where I could be a general. I could be a 5-star general blasting away troops and being ranked on the top 100 in BattleNet in StarCraft. I mean, that was my euphoric escape. And so that now developed a ritual of using. But now keep in mind that as this cycle of use in our children, every cycle becomes stronger and stronger as the neuronal pathways get wired together. So we have to be very careful. So what's the MRI and scientific evidence? So in the UK in 1998, in the journal Nature, which is a world-class biomedical research journal, they showed that gamers who play stimulate dopamine release in their brain. This has now been later confirmed in 2011 by several studies at functional MRI scans that the dopamine system is also stimulated as the addicted gamer anticipates gameplay and play games. What's interesting is that the areas of orange where this lights up on the brain is exactly in the alcohol and drug addict too. So the research out of Iowa State by Douglas Gentile shows 8 to 18-year-olds, 1 in 11 kids will be addicted to gaming and technology and internet. This is later confirmed by a longitudinal study by Gentile. Across multiple countries, the addiction rate is 1 in 11. Independent group in Greece showed that teenagers who are addicted to gaming and the internet actually are using pornography, gambling, and also playing games. It causes strain in relationships, particularly between them and their parents. And what's fascinating is that people who overuse the internet as a young child will actually later on switch to drugs and alcohol later on in life. So this is the game World of Warcraft, where it's a role-playing game. So individuals are controlling a character. The character collects armor and weapons and helmets. And I love this game. I lost 2 months of my life out of this, playing this game. So 1,200 hours I put into this game. So now imagine if it took me 10 hours to attain that magical sword, and I make $20 an hour, that sword is worth $200 to me. Okay, there's monetary value. So that's actually, there's $100 million being transacted online to buy these virtual items. These aren't real items that you hold. They're just items in the game that are being transferred. But the way it works is that you fight with your buddies. There's socialization. People use, saying, hey, this is fun. We're playing together. I'm playing with my friends. After 2 hours of fighting, you kill the boss in the dungeon, and he drops out little magical weapons. Bing, 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 bing. It's like pulling a slot machine. This is gambling behavior. They've hired the best neurobiologists to study human behavior and say, how do you make these games addictive? So my question to you is that if we have a clinical diagnosis for addictive gambling, and this is exactly like gambling behavior, why isn't there a clinical diagnosis and we're not watching out for addictive gaming behavior in our children? Who's played Tetris? So a small university called Harvard, Dr. Stickgold did this study. And this is very powerful, and this is why I believe that kids who use technology can actually learn really well. So what he did was he had gamers play Tetris for 7 hours. After 7 hours, the gamers had invasive images of Tetris blocks during the day, right before they fell asleep, and while they're sleeping. But what's amazing is that 3 of the subjects had traumatic brain injury. They could not recall the game Tetris, but they could recall the blocks. So that somehow this technology imprints messages or imprints learning behavior directly and bypassing regular learning channels. So if you use this Tetris effect properly in education, wow, great way to download high-speed storage through the eyeballs, to the optic nerve, to the occipital cortex, to the memory centers. However, apply the Tetris effect to this. There's 2 consequences here. If someone overuses something, there's loss of time and opportunities. So as a child develops and does not develop communication skills, eye-to-eye contact, and other areas of social behavior, guess what? They lose it. And they will lose it, and it's going to be hard to change them. It's like concrete that's curing. At first, it's liquefied, and then it becomes solidified. The other problem is the content. Video games, people just say, it's just a game. But you have to look at the content, the violence and the pornographic images in the games. Because like paper, you can distribute pornographic images and violent images as well, or publish the encyclopedia. So apply the Tetris effect to this. This is Dr. Andrew Doan. I just want to show some gameplays and the different degrees of violence. We have some mild violence up to extreme violence. So here's Minecraft, where a character is trapped and the trap door explodes. Another Minecraft scene where an individual is being assassinated. That was the title of the clip, is being assassinated. Here's another one where an individual is trapped in a lava pit and then falls to his or her demise. This is a trap set for the player where he can jump into a pit and then also similarly get trapped. And the reason why this trap is working, look at the last word statement that the gamer put in there. And here is the lure to the trapdoor was jump in, you'll get some diamonds. Now this is StarCraft 2, where a group of Marines were just nuked. Look at this is a third-person perspective, but still the bodies are being incinerated and there's explosions. So these are mild violence, I consider, PG-13 rated. This is World of Warcraft, which is a mature-only game. And this is where a group in a dungeon is attacking the Scarlet Monastery. And they're attacking basically nuns and priests and religious individuals within the monastery, but they're bad guys. This is a scene where Call of Duty, and it's very controversial here, this is probably more than R-rated, but you're playing a terrorist and your goal is to mow down groups of civilians. And this is extremely graphic, and you can tell the gamer, when they do play these games, the blood pressure does increase to 140 or 190 over 140 diastolic, and it's amazing. But notice how the game tells the player how to reload as well. So empty the clip, and then the game says reload. So these games, like Lieutenant Colonel Grossman has been saying, are teaching our kids how to kill and train them how to kill. So therefore, these mature rated games should not be allowed in the hands of an 8-year-old or 10-year-olds. And I know so many parents who let them play. This is Grand Theft Auto 4, showing a montage of headshots. And notice that these headshots are directed towards law enforcement individuals. And it's amazing is that when I give these talks around the country, I ask the kids, what happens when you shoot an individual in an arm or a leg? Well, they know that they don't die. So the kids, when they are allowed to play these games, are being trained through repetition, through simulation, through playing these games, that a headshot or a upper body torso shot results in a kill. And this individual is extremely skilled and is aiming for the head. And what's interesting is that some will argue, well, this is not the same as shooting a real gun. But when I took my son out to the shooting range for the very first time,
he was more than 80% accurate on the shotgun shooting skeet, and these games do train people how to shoot.
So obviously, you know, if these games by itself are not going to make a shooter scenario, mental illness by itself is not going to make a shooter scenario, but now we're seeing a phenomenon where we're seeing more kids who are losing empathy and they know how to pick up a gun and shoot. There was a 13-year-old in Paducah, Kentucky who's never fired a .22 pistol before, was able to go to a prayer group and do 7 headshots and 3 upper body shots, and that's really accurate. And so Lieutenant Colonel Grossman was saying, wow, you know, spec ops know how to do that, but without anatomical or surgical knowledge, they know where to shoot because these games are giving them rewards. In Call of Duty, they're getting 50+ points. So this is what I want to propose to you. Imagine the TETRIS effects. There's positives of gaming, but when we expose our young children to this kind of stuff, now imagine a gamer on a scale of 1 to 50, their stress level. Let's say they have Asperger's or even autism or Down syndrome and mental special needs where they can't process what's right and wrong. Rate them on a 1 to 50. Then determine how much are they playing. Adam Lanza in Connecticut played 3 days straight of violent video games before he shot his mother. And so the Navy Shooter Yard in D.C. was the same way. He played 10 hours of violent video games and no one raised a red flag. So we have to be careful on the degree and the exposure, and then you add that together and what happens is a healthy child will only have minor problems, minor antisocial behavior, which is maybe the cyberbullying on the headset. You can hear the 8-year-old saying, you're stupid, da-da-da-da-da-da, beep, 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 on the line. And so that's the antisocial behavior they're learning and practicing on the multiplayer play. However, you have somebody who's under incredible stress. This violent video game can be the tipping point to the point where there's rage and abuse, which I experienced in my family, and then finally, possibly the mass shooter experience. So really what I want to emphasize is that the child has about 100,000 hours in terms of waking hours with you before they're 18. So these are columns that represents brain columns in your mind. And your brain is actually organized in columns like this. And the time is milk, and that's finite. You cannot get more time. We all have 24 hours a day. So what happens when you have garbage in? Garbage what? Actually, garbage stays. How do you unsee something, right? How do you unlearn something? Garbage stays. Garbage out is the output. So as these columns are being filled up, so if you have somebody who is addicted to texting 50,000 messages a month, and that's all they know how to do communication-wise, guess what? They're not going to be a very effective communicator when they have to go face-to-face on a job interview. So what I want to encourage is for you to consider which columns are you filling in your child's mind. Or we let them be like average Americans with 50 hours a week. That's based on the Kaiser Foundation research. Or do we go with the recommended less than 2 hours a day, which is less than 14 hours a week of digital screen time that's entertainment. That way they have more time to fill up their columns of creative minds, their athletic abilities, their active service. I mean, literally the brain has hundreds of thousands of these types of columns that they can fill up. So the solution is education about technology addiction and video game addiction like we do with drug and alcohol. That's what I do, and that's why I travel around the country doing it. We have to engage our kids. So parents have to unplug from these devices, sit down and engage socially with your kids. We have to encourage community, athletic, and social programs. And that's how you build a whole and complete individual. Otherwise, you get walk-in dictionaries who are not empathetic. We have to provide real opportunities for challenges, for leadership positions, for love and acceptance in our communities for our children. Because if they don't find it in real life, they turn to online to find it. No screen time for children under 2. This is from the recommendation by the American Academy of Pediatrics. So don't use it as a digital sedative. I just gave you evidence how it sedates the wounded warrior. Guess what? It sedates a 2-year-old too. So be very careful how you use it. No gaming until age 13. I don't think the brain is developed enough to know right and wrong, because if you give a plate of candy to a child or a plate of broccoli, guess what? They all inevitably eat candy first. So this technology is digital candy. They love it. You heard the videos. They love it. So if we don't give them proper boundaries, guess what? They will indulge on the digital candy until their minds overdevelop in that area. Once they're 13, I recommend less than 30 minutes of play. And no online play, no multiplayer play, because that's where the bad habits evolve. That's where the cyberbullying evolves. That's where they learn how to do the smack talk. And then it overflows into the playground, into the schools. Follow the game ratings. If it says mature only, it's mature only. There's a reason. And I picked out specific clips here, and I've had feedback from my previous talks, and like, well, you picked the most gruesome things. Well, you know what? When I was addicted to gaming, I played those gruesome acts over and over and over again because that was the best scenes. I didn't play the little friendly social scenes. For me, I indulge over the violence. So then, if there's problems in the play, and I have brochures out on the table, and there's a little survey that helps you identify someone who has potential gaming problem, then no gaming at all. It's like the alcoholic in the house. If you have an alcoholic in their house, you don't drink in the house, or ever. So you have to remove all that. And it's hard in the digital world because now you have to balance between what is technology for school versus technology for pleasure. And that's very hard in this world, but you have to, because once they get to 17 or 16, it's very hard to change their mind. In the last week, I've met with 4 families, and I have 17-year-olds. One of them is a 4.0 international baccalaureate student. He only wants to be a professional gamer now. Doesn't want to be anything else in college. He plays 8 hours a day. But he's smart. He's like me, gets the straight A's, and now that's what he wants to do. And we don't want to produce more children like that. So here's my contact information. I ask you to partner with us. What I do in my nonprofit is I go lecture on this. So like me on Facebook, help spread the word. And if you want to hear this message in your community, just send me an email. Thank you.